Recently, I was at a Nexus Night and found myself facing down the barrel of a 23 power creature, one that I have a very personal grudge against, as it has been the bane of my existence ever since I first encountered it. And it's just a stupid camel. But to understand why I have such a grudge against this stupid camel, you have to know a little bit more about my experience with Riftbound. Recently, I started my journey into Riftbound by being able to go to 2 different pre-Rift events that I enjoyed so much that I picked up the structure deck for Fiora, and then I immediately took it and went to my local Nexus Night. I understand that, like most card games, a pre-constructed deck out of the box wasn't going to be topping locals, but I mainly went so I could get reps of the game and get some real constructed play experience. I ended up going against an Annie, an Ornn, and an Aurelia deck, and ended up not taking a single round. And even though a better deck could have helped a little, I still could clearly see that I was making misplay after misplay. I don't want to discredit my opponents at all, who were playing extremely well, and I felt like I was able to learn a lot from watching how they played. Even though I totally lost, I still had a great time playing those games, and everyone there was super nice and gave me a lot of tips to help me out. They really helped me learn what tricky cards to be on the lookout for in the different colors, and it basically gave me a good idea of what was a good idea and bad idea for the play patterns of the game, such as how it's generally a bad idea to kind of just sit at a battlefield, especially if you're tapped out of mana. This is because of how big tricky cards and combat tricks are in this game. So I left that night with the resolve to take this Fiora deck, learn more about it, and upgrade it, and be back for the next week. And that resolve lasted for all of 3 days. Yeah, I quickly kind of gave up on that after I went to Best Buy and saw that Unleashed had officially released. And not only had this set released, but they also came out with 2 structure decks, including the Vex structure deck that I picked up. I sleeved up this deck and played a little practice hands by myself, and holy cow, is this deck good right out of the box. It breaks the you don't really want to hunker down thing I had been taught, and the deck basically compensates by being super defensive with super defensive combat tricks. The champion Vex Apathetic is super incredible, since as long as it's sitting at a battlefield, all units your opponent play can't do any of their trickiness the turn they're played. There is a reason that this card is run as basically a 3-of in most decks that can run it. So I decided to bench Fiora for Vex, and after watching some videos and testing it out a bit, I was able to start making some upgrades with what I had pulled from my packs and what I could find at the bulk bin in my LGS. And with that, I got this resulting deck list, and I was actually really happy with it, especially being able to find these Sona Harmoniouses, who is key to help me solve a big rule I had been taught of wanting to develop your board instead of hunkering down, because she allows me to do both. I get to develop my board while also getting my mana back for my super defensive combat tricks. It was great. And of course, I pulled an altered Vex and Vilemaw, so I had to make sure those went in the deck. And with my new deck, I was ready for my next Nexus Night. My first opponent was playing a Master Yi deck, and while my game plan for the deck was basically going great 90% of the time, it would crumble the second he put out a single creature. This stupid fucking camel! This guy has the simplest line of text in the game. It can't be targeted by opponent's cards, but that one line broke my brain and my game plan in one fell swoop. All my combat tricks gone out the window, unusable against it. And it's a decent size on its own, so if I try to swing into it, I'm losing bodies. And he has Master Yi and Punch First buffing it, and meaning I don't ever trust swinging into it. And if I ever could kill it, he had a Zonia's Hourglass to make sure it would just stay alive. So I eventually lost going 1-2 for that match, but I was not deterred. My game plan was working. I just had to not see that stupid camel again. My next match was against an Aurelia, and I was super nervous because they had a blinged out legend. And I knew Aurelia was still considered a top dog in this meta. But after taking an early lead in game 1, my Vex Apathetic seemed to shut down a lot of the tricky things it likes to do, since it wasn't able to play creatures and threaten my battlefield with them in the turn that they're played. And since I got a Sonya out, it basically meant they had a hard time catching up, giving me the round. This round also taught me a key technique for this deck, and it's playing my hand like a poker hand. Even when I don't have a Sonya or an answer in hand, not playing a card and developing my board would kind of trick my opponent into thinking I did have an answer, and they would sometimes just make a wrong play out of fear. The next round, they seemed to try and compensate for my Vex apathetic by setting up at base first, but this meant that I could get out to an early lead, and thanks to my Vioma, I was able to hold out and get the win, giving me my first win of a game at a Nexus Night. I was feeling really good seeing how my deck actually did its thing and proved that it was working. But my next match was against a LeBlanc deck, which I already also knew was a top tier deck. And I gotta say, after those rounds, I see why LeBlanc is considered top tier, but holy crap, does she probably have a terrible matchup in the Vex. My deck was absolutely doing its thing and seemed to constantly shut down anything LeBlanc wanted to do. They wanted mirror tokens that could do things to the turn they're played. Too bad, Vex says they're stunned and can't move. They want to threaten me with an army of small attackers. Too bad, Vioma says they don't do crap. And if they wanted to not engage with me and play their own defensive game, too bad, I have control spells that basically work super well on all their small units. Those games just went super quick since my opponent saw the writing on the wall early and conceded once I had a solid lead, and once I had gotten rid of their board both times. But this gave me an overall record of 2-1 for my second ever Nexus Night. I left with my head held high, especially learning the Master Yi I went against went undefeated. But even though I was super happy with that performance, I knew I could do better. So, with some actual games under my belt now with this deck, I made a few changes to compensate for the weaknesses I found while playing the deck. The key one I did was adding 2 Ahri Alluring. While my game plan was doing great when I could take the lead and just stay on the defense, it meant that if I was ever behind, I had to be aggressive. That's not what my deck ever wants to be doing. So with these Ahri, even if I was ever behind, I could just shelter up at one battlefield, get them out, and now they have to respond to me, and I don't have to respond to them. So 2 weeks later, I went back to my locals for my third ever Nexus Night. My first game was against a Lee Sin, and while I was traumatized to see orange because of that stupid camel, game 1 I was able to get the lead and hold with all my defensive spells in my arsenal. In game 2, I was able to see a good combo of 2 Ahri Alluring hiding behind a giant Vioma that honestly feels like it should be illegal, giving me a 2-0 record in this game. My next match was against a Kazik, and thankfully, even though they were in orange, I still had to see none of that stupid camel. Game 1 was extremely close, but my Vioma came in clutch and was able to blow out their army and allow me to catch up and secure the win. Game 2 was also super close, but I was able to get Sona and Ahri set up, allowing me a lot of protection on a battlefield that they had to try and answer. Unfortunately for them, it seemed that I constantly was drawing the outs to anything they tried to use, helping me lock down Game 2 and secure another 2-0 win. However, my third opponent to go undefeated and take the crown for this Nexus Night was against the same Master Yi as last time, but this time was going to be different. This time I have experience, and now I had Ahri to help me never have to attack into that stupid camel. And I was even able to take game 1 without them, thanks to getting Sonas up so I could constantly establish my board while keeping all the mana for combat tricks I needed. Game 2 was going great. I still hadn't seen any of my Ahri, but I was able to get my Sonas on board and I had a decent lead. I only needed to just hold this battlefield and I would win. That was until my opponent played my nemesis. And not only played it, but they did a combo that pumped that thing up so big that it had 23 power. Even though I had a huge army at this battlefield, they were able to blow it all up with one fell swoop. Thankfully, I had to ride the wind, so I was able to keep my Vex cheerleads alive. But now, I was on a back foot since my entire army had basically been destroyed. But they had just spent a lot of runes to do that play. So by pushing my Vex into the other battlefield, I could play a Rebuke for cheaper, bouncing their only other unit they had on board. Meaning, it was just down to Vex and that stupid camel. He would need to get that thing over to my battlefield to try to beat my Vex. Otherwise, I would hold the battlefield and win. However, he was smart and was able to use a first mate so his camel could essentially move twice, allowing it to reach my Vex and start a showdown. But I was prepared, and thanks to a discipline and a couple defies, I was able to make sure my Vex was able to get big enough to slay that stupid camel and take the win, going 2-0. Somehow, over the course of 3 Nexus Nights, I went from super new going 0-3 and never taking a round to going 3-0 and never dropping a round. At this point, I was definitely invested in this game and wanted to play some more, and I immediately went looking for another Nexus Night. And while my regular store wasn't running one next week, I was able to find a different store that was. This LGS is one I regularly go to for my One Piece locals, and if this was going to be anything like that, I knew these players were going to be tough. And they certainly lived up to that expectation. But even with that, I was able to go 2-1 against my first opponent, who was playing Leona. And I was able to just kind of outstun them because Vex is way too good. I then had a Vex mirror match, and I went 2-1 there as well, able to use Vile Maw to break through their holds. And I went against Ella Blanc at the end, going 2-1 yet again, because again, this matchup seems so Vex favored, giving me yet another 3-0 record and proving that last week wasn't just a fluke, even if this one did have a few dropped rounds. I had a great time at all those events, and I can firmly say I will be going back and playing this game a lot more. And with me going 3-0 twice now, I've got a crown to defend at 2 different LGS. I gotta say that these people at these events were super nice and super helpful, especially when I was just starting out. They even let me know of some events called Summoner Skirmishes that are apparently the next level up in competitive play at those stores, and let me sign up a little bit early than most people would have been able to. So next week, I'll see how I can fare at the next level up. So stay tuned and let me know what upgrades you'd recommend for this deck, cause I really want to do well at these skirmishes. I'm currently debating adding another Vile Maw, just cause it seemed to be super impactful in every game I ever saw it. And let me know if you're playing Riftbound, and if so, what deck you're playing. And until then, have a great day.